Welcome to the pre-recording of lecture 20. So this is the second part of the 10th session of the 8-week summer course, Introduction to Computer Science. And the purpose of this review session of this part is to provide some representative questions on Python programming. So, because this is so important, I will start again with the policies on the midterm exam, the skipping policy, the sign-up policy, and then I will go over the questions on Python. The slides state the questions. Then there are two Jupyter notebooks, one notebook with the questions, and then another notebook with questions and answers. For the sake of time, if you're really pressed in time, if you are looking at this pre-recording after the fact, not too short before the midterm exam, you could immediately go to the answers. But from a pedagogical perspective, let's emphasize the concepts first. But first things first, so the most important thing is that I would really like that if you do the exam, that at least you are already aware that, 24 hours prior to the exam, that you are aware that there is an exam. Please do not take an exam totally unprepared. So that's the main reason why I would prefer that you send me an email that you will take the exam. By default, if I do not receive that email, then I will not send you the questions. So the questions will be sent to you via email in a reply to your email. So there will be multiple versions of the exam. So computer science is extremely fast, and we have already covered so many topics. That is to also for me to allow that we kind of cover a little bit of everything without having to overload the exam. So the other important issue is that the answers must be uploaded into Gradescope. So do not send me an email with your answers. They must be in a single Jupyter notebook. So you will be receiving the questions as a PDF file. So the slides are also PDF. But you will also be receiving the questions in a Jupyter notebook. So you can take this exam, you can take this course asynchronously, but not the exams. So the exams happen within the time frame between 10 a.m. Chicago time and 11:40. That is the time where we usually meet. So you do not need to be signed up in Zoom. You do not need to be logged into Blackboard, except at the very end when you upload your answers into Gradescope. Okay, so if you feel that you're not yet well enough prepared, or if you are fine with having the final exam count for 300 out of 200 points, then it's fine if you skip. You do not need to give me a reason for skipping. By default, if you do not do anything, if you just realize that, hey, on Friday morning we do have a midterm exam, I may still send you the questions, but it's a little bit up in the air what will happen. So most likely, if you suddenly realize at 10:30 there is an exam going on and I don't have any questions, then well, you will skip the midterm exam. All right. I have 5 representative questions. So Python is extremely good at format conversions. So here we are converting from yards to inches. I like the metric system, and I wouldn't know how to do this uh, without looking at the definitions. We have a string which gives measurements in yards, and we want to convert it into inches. So the purpose of this is that you use a format conversion. So you have a string on input and you use a dictionary to convert the number that is in there into the new string. Um, if it's well defined, so here the your answer should be with the statements in a Jupyter notebook. Also, the Jupyter notebook here, this is important that it should run from top to bottom. So in a Jupyter notebook, you have the flexibility to execute every statement at any order. But when you present your solutions, they should be they should have an order. So an algorithm is an ordered set, and we read from top to bottom. So strings are important data structures. They are also just elementary data types in Python, just like the numbers are. How to take a string and grab out the number, that is what you need to do. The dictionary is necessary is that we also want to do the same logic if we want to convert from inches back into yards. So the format conversions from a string into a number, and also the other way around from a number into a string. So the final result should actually be that string that is over there. Okay, so that is the first question. So you will have at least 10 minutes time for every question, but spend a couple of minutes just reflecting on the question. So also in solving the questions, it's good that you first try to do this on your own. And if you get stuck, this is an open book, open computer, you can use all the resources that are posted online, but they may waste time if you are not really organized very well. Python is high productivity through its list comprehensions. So we first saw the data structures, the composite data structures, tuples, lists, and dictionaries before we saw the control structures. So here counting the number of times the vowels are occurring. So the word queuing has many vowels. So you can do this in Python in one line. So I will illustrate how to make that line. So when you present your solution, please also show your work. So we started out with list comprehensions. You could say is a for loop in between square brackets. But there can also be an if test coming. And there are double loops, so that are possible as well. So if you can write the example right away, then that is fine, but you must use the list of vowels. So it starts from vowels already here. And in the example, if you can do this for the example queuing, so you must assign word to something, then if you can do it for this queuing example, then you can do it for any word. Loops. In reasoning about the loop, the state table is important. So your answer should be in a Jupyter notebook. In the first half of this session, in lecture 19, I illustrated how you can use a markdown cell to nicely format a table. So in Markdown, it's down mark, so it's actually not that much that you need to know. But it's good that you see more practice about formatting state tables. One of the flow charts, so in the first session we saw unsorted list, finding the maximum. And if you have a sorted list, then actually the maximum, like here, is at the very end. So maintaining sorted data collections is very important. So one of the operations is to insert a number. So we've seen how to insert. Lists are very versatile. You can insert anywhere, but you need to know position. So you need to know an index. And the purpose of this code segment or this code snippet that you will develop will be to compute the index to insert a number in a sorted list. We first look at an example, and it's also good if your Python code runs for this example, it's more than likely to work for any example. So first you can do this just by looking at it. Make sure that you understand the problem. So you must insert the number before 54, and 54 occurs at position 3. So we start at 0, 1, 2, 3. So the loop will stop at index 3. So that is the command ultimately that need to be executed to insert 50 into that list. So the list is again sorted. So in the state loop, in the state table, you reason for the loop, about the loop, without having actually written the loop. So it could also happen that the question is phrased backwards. You are given a piece of Python code and you are asked to write down the state table. Now, actually, if that happens, then it's just a print. So we have shown already how to print. So you could, if you're really a Python programmer and you are in a hurry, then you can solve two first and put the print statements in there, and that will print the state table. Fine with me as well. Okay, functions. Functions have arguments, they have local variables, and in a program there are global variables. Global variables are alive at any time, at least when the statement is executed. Um, Local variables are alive only when the code is executing. So here, this is a very small piece of code, 3 lines for the function, no documentation string, although you can guess that it computes the area, multiplying an R value with an H value. Which variables are global, which variables are local? What is the type of the capital A? Um, there will be a Jupyter notebook with that code in there. You can run the code and just print the type of A. That is fine too. But you must answer these 3 questions. And the fact that this is given like this suggests that you could do this simply by looking at the code. Also, the table must be completed, so with the values. Again, if you're unsure or if you want to be double sure, you can run the code and introduce many print statements that will say what it is. The purpose of this exercise is that you demonstrate your knowledge about the difference of the scope. And in some sense, you could say the lifespan of the variables in a program. When do variables in a program exist? And it depends whether they are arguments of a function, whether they are local or whether they are global. Okay, so we ended with file processing, and this last exercise is mostly about programming. So this exam is mainly intended not so much for you to write programs, but that you demonstrate that you understand the main concepts of programming. We transform data. So here we have a file that contains numbers that are on lines and separated by commas. So the question is to find the largest number in that file. So to find, and you can say it's 0.81, the answer is already there. And it will also print out the line number counting from 0. You may assume that the file is not empty. So in the first part of this review, lecture 19, we considered the finding of the maximum element in a list that was not sorted. This is essentially the same problem. So as mathematicians, we often reduce a problem to problems what we know already. So you could make one big list of numbers and then take the maximum of that. However, you must print the line number. Okay, let me go now to the second part. So this is the Jupyter notebook with the questions. On the exam, I will email you questions. I will email you the questions in a PDF file, but I will email you the questions also in a Jupyter notebook. Here I labeled the titles corresponding to the topic that I want to review. The titles on the Jupyter notebook will be question 1, question 2, question 3, etc. Okay, again, in preparation for the midterm exam, do not ask me if you are well prepared for the midterm exam. A good exercise would be that you download the Jupyter notebook from the website and then also do the questions without looking at the answers. So if you get stuck somewhere, you can kind of see what it is that you would need to review, where you need more practice. The Jupyter notebook is an important aspect. So here you see, if I go to the code, here you see the markdown table again. So the markdown table looked very nice when formatted. You can solve the exercises also in other ways. So I said that doing first the Python code and printing is fine as well. Although you still need to write some explanations. And the explanations, I can tell whether it's in your own words or whether it's somewhere copied from somewhere else. All right. So using the Jupyter notebook that I email you has benefits in copying and pasting. So you will start your answer with the beginning of the state table. Then I've experienced that copying and pasting from code goes easiest than copying markdown. Okay, so these are the questions again. So this is the format in which you will receive them. So here is another markdown table. Um, you see the formatting is very straightforward once you know it and once you have some practice. I mentioned the copying and pasting. So here you see the data that's in there. I have already practiced this, so I do have a numbers file sitting in there. You can copy and paste and make a numbers file by opening a text file in the Jupyter Lab environment. All right, so let me go now to the answers now that we have dwelled long enough on the questions. So here is the first question. Number types and conversions. So we want to convert any string that contains a unit in there. And depending on the unit, so that's the purpose of this dictionary. If it is inches, we want to convert to yards. If it is yards, we want to convert to inches. So you can start by typing the dictionary. So define a dictionary, but I read the question entirely. So I started with the string, and you will get the number 5 out of there, because 5 times 36 is 180. You may not solve it, so without the dictionary you would just multiply 5 times 36, but you're not supposed to solve it that way. Also, you're actually not supposed to type in the number 5. So you should start from the string, you should convert the string into the proper units. And that goes by splitting on the space. Um, so the split is a very useful tool. We split on the space, we get a list back. It's also good practice to have one statement per code cell. In that sense, you have an immediate check on syntax errors and other errors. To compute with the number 5, we have to convert to an integer. And the statements here, they run from top to bottom. So you can experiment in your Jupyter notebook in other order, but it's good that if you, before submitting, or actually already when you think you have solved the question completely, that you restart your kernel, you clear the output, and then you run all the statements again. So that is to see whether then it still executes. So we use the dictionary to convert the yard to find the 36, and here is where the computation happens. I compute a new number, I call it m. M is now for the number of inches. You could also have called it inches. So notice that I do not type in the word yard. Um, so the yard is the key that is used to look up. If you had given a string with a different unit, so the unit is the second element in the list. So I selected it. So I could also, instead of having unit, so this was another check, I could have had L at 1. So I could have immediately selected from that. So we go from a string to a number. Here I convert it into an integer. It's not wrong to convert to a float. Um, uh, you convert from a number into a string immediately, or you could also use the format strings. Also fine. So there are many ways how to solve this. But in any case, you should go from the input string to a new string as new, which actually gives the conversion. Okay. tuples, lists, and dictionaries, and list comprehension. So I'm scrolling most likely too fast, so I'm showing you the complete solution. Actually, the complete solution is only one line with the input. So there are 3 lines. But I inserted the statements 14 and 15 to indicate the intermediate steps. So we go from a string or from a word inside the string to a list of characters by enumerating all the characters in the word. So this is a very useful construction. We use the vowels here. So, and you see, I've done this with copying and pasting. So I started with this construction, and then I copied it and pasted here, and then I copied and pasted again. So from this word queuing, you see the order U, E, U, E, I. So actually you have the 5 vowels, they appear in sequence, and I want to know the number. So I'm selecting all the vowels, and then I take the length of that list. So if you see the answers, then fine, but know that there is some experimentation on there. And don't give up too quickly, so you have budgeting about 10 minutes for every question. So I'm not spending that much talking about them. The state table then. So here you see the state table inserting the number 50 before the 53. So the step index is the same, the step number is the same as the index here. So in some sense there is some redundancy, but there is always a step counter. The step counter is the step. So these, don't forget in the state table the initialization. So here I give the initialization. It could be, so in the review, I'm giving you the beginning of the state table. It could be on the exam that I just tell you here there is the initial value. All right, just making the point again. Formatting your answers is also important. Here is the code for the state table. You can copy and paste. So this Jupyter notebook will be available. So if you need a template for a state table, you can use that. The same happens for the truth table. So on the exam, you will have to make a truth table. You can take the truth table that is already there. So in some sense, how do you prepare for the exam? Please be organized. So we have already seen, so this is lecture 20. So this will be our 20th Jupyter notebook, plus the 3 quizzes that you had already. So you have 23 Jupyter notebooks. You may sometimes know how we have already seen this already somewhere, but if you have to scroll through every single notebook that we have seen, then it will be a very long exam. So be careful about open book exams. One may have the impression we don't have to study. That's not true. You have to study differently. So you have to get organized. And practice. Think about variations on this. We've seen many loops. For other loops that we have seen, can you make the state table? Now, if you are a Python programmer, you may, or if you are really in a hurry, you may want to do immediately the loop. Here I separated everything into statements. So we have the definition of the list. We have to start with one list. So you could also take a list of random numbers and sort them, and then pick some random number also within the range of your random numbers. So that's the X you're looking for, and then we have the index. Note here we can loop for X in the list, but actually we need to know the index. So that means that the index is actually the result. So in this exercise, index is an important variable. So that's the whole virtue also of the state table, that you are thinking about what are the roles of the variables. Now, the number that I picked is in the middle of the list, but you shouldn't actually count on this. So it could be that the list, or if you have given the number 100, then the last index is actually the length of the list. So that is why the first stop condition is that as long as the index is less than the uh, list itself. So again, the list is not empty. So if it works for this example, list is fine. And you can combine both conditions. So I've tested this. So it is fine if you have the first condition index is less than the length, and then the other condition is you continue as long as the current element is larger than or greater than x, or as long as x is less than or equal. We are looking for the first element that is larger than x to insert it there. I've tested this. Python is clever enough. If the index, if you have an and the first test fails, it will not evaluate the second test. But I don't like this type of coding exactly. I do not want to rely too much on the cleverness. Um, as I will not execute this statement here in the if test if the index is out of bounds of my list L. I do not like key errors. So there are two tests here. Um, and you will increment explicitly the index. Okay. So there is also a way to work with a for loop for index in the range, starting from 1 till the length. And then you need to break out as well to make sure that you have the value of the index on return. So when the loop ends, the index will be the first element that is larger than or equal the number x. So that is the test. Okay, let's now go to the arguments and the local variables. So here you see the question again. So we have a function. The function has two arguments. So the arguments are considered as local variables. So the values only exist during the function call. So in the table, we distinguish three stages: before the call, during the call, and after the call. So it could also be solved, this exercise, with diagrams. So the variables D and L are the global variables, and they refer to the values 3 and 1 before the call. So before the call, there are only two values that exist, two of the global variables, but the variables that are global are D, L, and A. So, but before the call, A doesn't have a value yet. So you shouldn't answer anything there. So let me see if I can, yes, I can show everything on one screen. So the questions are actually, there's not that large. I spend actually much more time formatting it. And so there's only one local variable, so there are two arguments, but the arguments, you can consider them as local variables, so they have about the same lifespan, but they are not local variables, they are arguments. So there are formal parameters. That's also what we named them. So they're formal. So they actually, at the time of running, they do have actual values. So they're just placeholders. Everywhere where you see a formal variable, you replace it with the value. This is all call by value. So remember that we have seen call by reference. On the exam, I may ask you a call by reference example. Um, uh, a, a, an example of a function where the input parameter is not a value but is a list. Then the state of the list is important. So what is the content of the list during, before the call, during the call, and after the call. So it's not because something is a formal argument that it does not exist. So the object it refers to does not exist. So these numbers here that you see, they persist after the call is over. So during the call, uh, the d is divided by 2, and the division in Python 3, or just in plain Python, is actually the floating point division. So even if the d is the integer number 3 and the 2 is the integer number 2, the result of d divided by 2 is the floating point number 1.5. Um, so you have to type that up. So here I'm answering the question in the order it is listed. You could run everything and query for the type. And then also, but then you still have to write a sentence. So it's very important that you write complete sentences like I've done here, and that you present the information in a structured manner. You can write the sentence as well. So it's fine to say before the call, the variables R, H, A, and capital A are undefined. D refers to 3, L refers to 1. But you see, you have to write a little bit more. Okay, so let me now go to the last exercise. And I was actually a little bit too fast in solving it. So in my preparation, I skipped a step. So there is the line 2 that I have to print. So I have to do something more. There is the making of the data. So here I have the data that I copy. So I do Control C. And then in my launcher, I have the text file. So then I can do Control V, and then I can save it. So now it's untitled.txt. I save this as numbers.csv. But I've done this already. So here it is. So let me remove. I will discard this. So somewhere to solve this exercise, to solve it, you can just write plain Python code, but if it's not tested out, then the correctness is certainly in doubt. So that is also important. So I'm very well aware that if you are able now to write a good documentation string, you can probably feed this into a chat GPT or into a search engine, and you will get some plausible code. But if it doesn't work, and if you don't give any information how you got to your result, then you will get a 0 for partial credit. It's much better to actually indicate how you work. This is finding the maximum again. So there is a maximum function, but if the numbers are on file, it's not going to work. So the maximum function does not work here. It's important that you initialize. The file is not empty. So here I'm solving the problem for one line. So I'm opening the file for reading, UTF-8. So that file is there, opened for reading. The file handle has the name numbers. So I read a line. The file is not empty, there's a little line there. I split on the comma. So split is very important. We've seen this in the beginning, in the first question. We have to convert to floating point numbers. There is still an intermediate step here, and I should probably indicate this. I also did not solve this in this way. So here is my first, I have to change something anyway. So here is how I solved this in the beginning. So I was just printing the numbers. So that was my first solution. So where I print the numbers and the number strings. So you see, if you exit, the numbers was already defined here, but I have my number strings. So there is a new line, but you don't have to worry about that dangling new line. So I'm closing the file again. It's very important. And then I'm running this again. So I still have to do something. So I will run the code. And now the complete code is still not below. So there is still one intermediate step. Oops. I was afraid that something like that would happen. I hope there is an undo. There is an undo. Here is the undo. So you have the copy and then you have the paste. So you should first create a new cell before you paste. So this is the first, and now I have while true, I will scan all the other lines. And I need a line number. So the line number is 0. So I'm assuming that the maximum is on the first line. The first line is 0. So I will read a line. And I can only continue if there is something on that line. So if I have the empty string, then I will break. Otherwise, I will print out the numbers. So split, copy and paste, and I will extract the numbers and convert. Before I continue, I have to increase the line number. So actually, I wanted to show how do you get the line number. On line number. Here you are. So it prints the numbers on, so it's starting from line 0, but every time I get out of the break, I can increment my line number. Okay, so the complete code, so I was too hurry in my preparation. So I have the line number and the maximum. So the line number has to be inserted, and each time when I come out of the break, when I do not do the break, so I haven't braked out, so I have a valid line, so then I'm processing the next line. And to do this on one program, I also print out the line number. Here you are. So this is the complete code. Okay, so this is actually the most serious programming exercise. Even I have a lot of practice, even I would not type this in all the way all at once. For pedagogical purposes, and this is something where a Jupyter notebook is extremely good, I give the versions that work. If you're a little bit paranoid, you can leave them in. So in some sense, the answer is what is in code cell 29. For the review, so it's fine if you give that, so if that is your final answer, if it is correct. However, if you do not get to the correct code, you will still get credit. Perhaps not so much for, well, you will get a lot of credit for actually also the first step. Whenever there is a loop, you begin on the loop to think about the initialization. So in some sense, having the initialization correct is already, I wouldn't say half of the exercise, but without it, the program cannot be correct. So without a correct initialization, it's highly unlikely that your program will be correct. So it is a critical step. So forgetting the line number, as I did when I prepared this, I didn't realize the question itself, so I did not read the question either very well. So please take some efforts that you don't make my mistake. But forgetting the line number is merely a detail. So I put that in there because you could have read all the lines and then simply concatenated the lists and then taken the maximum from there. You could still do it line by line. So you could still read all the lines and then traverse all the lines. This is a perfectly good solution as well. Processing line by line, you read all the lines and then you traverse line by line. And you can solve it like this as well. Okay, also here I do not need 50 minutes. Let me go back to the most important action item. So think about, I mean, the most important action item is actually to start studying. So I do this pre-recording before the 5th of July, so before the actual review. This is posted. So the action item is that I hope that at least half a day or even one entire day you can spend on preparing for the midterm exam. Mainly get organized. The benefit of the midterm exam is that you will be under time pressure. So nothing that we have done, or I shouldn't say this, I mean, the concepts that we have seen are quite many. So in order to write a good Python program, you have to know how to combine many different concepts. You may know what is a dictionary, you may know what is a string, what is a number, but then you have to use them all in one program. So that is hard. So you have a lot of time when you work on a project. Also, you have more time when you work on a quiz. But during an exam, there are many, many problems because I'm already assuming that you know, you have practiced things. So in particular, practice a little bit with files. So you can study. So I've mentioned that we have seen already so many Jupyter notebooks. You can start executing them starting from the last lectures. And then you can also see when in a lecture you do not understand something, you can go back to the proper earlier lecture where the concept was introduced. Okay, I'm stopping here, and I hope this review was interesting and useful in the preparation for the exam.